the newsroom today. A body fell from a plane and then landed in somebody's garden. It happened in London as the flight from Nairobi approached Heathrow Airport. A homeowner just relaxing in his yard when that body landed 3 feet away from him.
In 2015, people in London witnessed a terrifying scene when a body fell from the sky as a plane lowered its landing gear to land. They could not believe their eyes. This was not an accident. It was the tragic end of a hidden journey. Freezing air, lack of oxygen, and the risk of being crushed at any moment surrounded the travelers. Yet one man somehow survived. His story carries not only deep pain, but also a shocking truth about the dream of migrants chasing a better life. What makes a person risk everything, even life itself, for such a fragile chance? In the summer of 2015, the quiet routine of a London neighborhood was broken by a sight so shocking that people at first refused to believe it was real. As a British Airways Boeing 747 lowered its landing gear to approach Heathrow Airport, something fell from the sky. It was not luggage. It was not wreckage from the plane. It was a man. The body struck the ground in Richmond, crashing into a residential area only a few miles from the runway. People nearby heard the sound, rushed outside, and froze at what they saw. A young man lay motionless, his body broken by the fall. Some neighbors covered their mouths in disbelief, unable to process what had just happened above their own homes. For years they had lived under the constant noise of aircraft flying low on their way to Heathrow, but none imagined that one day a person would drop out of the sky in front of them. Within minutes, police and emergency crews surrounded the scene. They quickly confirmed that this was not a passenger who had fallen from an open door, and it was not a worker caught in some tragic accident. The man had been hidden inside the wheel well of the plane, clinging to the undercarriage as it traveled more than 5,000 miles from Johannesburg to London. The discovery left investigators speechless. Wheel wells are spaces designed only for landing gear, not for people, with no oxygen, no heating, and powerful hydraulics moving around. It is a place where survival should be impossible. The tragedy seemed complete, yet it wasn't. As officers inspected the aircraft after it landed, they made another discovery. A second man had been inside the same wheel well. Unlike his companion, he was still alive, though barely. He was unconscious, his body burned and broken, but his heart was still beating. The contrast was unbearable. One man dead in the streets of London, another fighting for life on the tarmac. Reporters soon labeled the victim the man who fell from the sky, but they could not explain the deeper story. Who were these two men? Why had they risked everything to attempt such a desperate journey? And how could one of them possibly survive 11 hours in a place where no human should? The flight from Johannesburg to London lasts close to 11 hours, and for two young men hiding inside the wheel well of a Boeing 747, it was nothing short of a death sentence. From the moment the plane left the runway, danger surrounded them. The giant wheels pulled upward into the narrow space, and the force of the hydraulics could have crushed them instantly. With no seats, no lights, and no protection, they were trapped in a steel cage designed for machines, not human beings. Inside this compartment, the temperature began to fall within minutes. At cruising altitude, it could drop as low as minus 60 degrees Celsius, cold enough to freeze human tissue in a short time. The air also became dangerously thin. Above 18,000 feet, Oxygen is too low to support clear thought, and without pressurization, the body quickly begins to fail. Pilots know that at 35,000 feet, even trained adults lose consciousness in just a few minutes. For stowaways, it is not a question of if they will pass out, but when. Justin, the survivor, remembered only fragments of those first moments. He recalled the roar of the engines vibrating through his bones and the sight of small houses shrinking below him. His friend Carlito, sitting close in the dark, whispered words that would stay with him forever. "Yeah, we made it." Soon after, Justin blacked out. Unconscious, his body entered a state of suspended survival. With his arms hooked around thick cables, he remained wedged in place, while his body temperature plummeted and his breathing slowed almost to nothing. For most people, that combination would end in death, but for Justin, it may have been the only reason he lived. Carlito was not so fortunate. When the plane approached Heathrow and the landing gear unfolded, he was thrown out of the compartment. Pathologists later confirmed he was still alive at that moment, his heart beating as he struck the ground, but the impact caused fatal injuries. Justin, still trapped inside, awoke only as the wheels touched the runway. His leg was shattered, his body burned where it had pressed against the hot cables, and his lungs filled with the scars of oxygen loss. Rescuers carried him out, barely breathing, and doctors placed him in a coma that lasted 6 months. During that time, he had no knowledge of Carlito's fate. It was only later, when police showed him his friend's passport, that the truth was revealed. The contrast between the two outcomes was almost unbearable. One man dead in a London street, another alive but broken, carrying memories he could never escape. It left the world wondering how such a survival was even possible. Was this the result of pure chance, or could there be a scientific reason behind it? Behind the shocking fall in London was a story that began thousands of miles away in southern Africa. Carlito Vale grew up in Beira, Mozambique, a city scarred by a 15-year civil war that killed nearly 1 million people. He was orphaned young, surviving in a country where poverty and violence shaped every part of daily life. Despite this, people remembered him as intelligent and cautious, a man with dreams larger than the streets where he lived. He married Anna, and together they had a daughter named Shamila. By the time she was 11 years old, Carlito wanted nothing more than to lift his family out of hardship. He dreamed of becoming a DJ, building a new life in Europe, and offering his child a future beyond war and poverty. In South Africa, another life was unraveling. Justin, also known as Themba Kabeka, was raised in hardship after losing his grandmother in 2009. He had been drifting since he was a teenager, often homeless by the age of 13 or 14. Street gangs targeted him, and survival meant living with constant fear. Despite his struggles, he had a sharp mind and a will to escape the cycle that trapped so many around him. When Justin met Carlito, the two quickly became close, bound by the same hunger for a better life. They called each other brothers, not by blood but by choice, sharing both their pain and their hope. The idea to stow away came from Justin's long nights reading books on aviation and mechanics. He studied how planes worked, convinced that the wheel well could carry them across continents. Desperation turned this risky plan into their only option. With little money and no chance of visas, they saw no other path to reach Europe. On the night of their attempt, they prepared carefully. They wore 2 t-shirts each, layered jackets, and pairs of jeans, hoping the clothes would shield them from the cold. They climbed over the fence at Johannesburg's OR Tambo International Airport without help from anyone inside. For them, this was not a crime, but an act of survival. Inside the darkness of the wheel compartment, Justin remembered the thunder of the engines shaking the metal around them. As the plane rose higher, he saw the lights of the houses below growing smaller. Carlito turned to him in the pitch-black space and whispered words of triumph. "Yeah, we made it." Those would be the last words Justin heard from his friend before losing consciousness. The journey that began with a dream of safety would soon turn into a nightmare written across the skies of London. But how could anyone endure 11 hours in such conditions when science says survival is almost impossible? Surviving inside the wheel well of a long-haul plane is close to impossible, and science explains why. The first danger comes the moment the wheels fold into the compartment. Hydraulic arms as strong as machines in a factory press upward with incredible force, and any misstep can leave a body crushed before the plane even leaves the ground. For those who escape the machinery, the fight has only just begun. As the aircraft climbs, the atmosphere changes dramatically. Oxygen levels drop quickly, and above 18,000 feet, hypoxia sets in. When the brain receives too little oxygen, awareness fades in minutes. Pilots are trained for this condition, but an unprotected person has no chance. Confusion leads to unconsciousness, and prolonged exposure can damage the brain beyond repair. By 30,000 feet, the thin air alone is enough to silence breathing altogether. At the same time, the cold becomes lethal. At 10,000 meters, the air temperature can plunge to minus 60 degrees Celsius, a level that can freeze skin and muscle in a short period. The human body is designed to stay near 37 degrees, but once core temperature slips below 35, the systems that control the heart and lungs begin to collapse. If it falls under 30, the heart rhythm grows unstable, and cardiac arrest is likely. Most victims die long before they reach cruising altitude. Yet medicine has noted rare cases where extreme cold, instead of killing, has preserved life. Doctors call this the paradox of hypothermia. When the body cools rapidly, metabolism slows and the need for oxygen drops. It is as if the body forces itself into a state of hibernation, conserving enough energy to protect vital organs for a short time. This strange effect has saved a handful of stowaways who would otherwise never have survived. Noise also adds to the suffering. Jet engines produce over 120 decibels, louder than a rock concert and strong enough to cause permanent hearing damage. The sound reverberates through the steel frame, leaving no escape from its intensity. And then there is decompression. Unlike the sealed cabin, the wheel compartment is open to outside pressure. As the plane rises, gases in the blood expand, creating painful cramps and swelling. It is the kind of stress that pushes the body past its natural limits. Justin's survival defied these odds. His unconscious state may have protected him, his arms wrapped around a cable that kept him from falling when the gear opened. Every factor that should have killed him somehow aligned in a fragile balance between life and death. That is why his story is studied not just as tragedy, but as a scientific mystery. But Justin and Carlito were far from the only ones to attempt such a journey. Across the world, dozens of young men have risked the same path, and most never lived to tell their tale. But his case raises another question. If survival is so rare, then how many others have tried the same desperate act and vanished without a trace? The survival of Justin was not just rare, it was almost unheard of when compared to the history of wheel-well stowaways. A report by the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration counted 113 recorded cases worldwide between 1947 and 2015. Of those, 86 people died and only 23 lived, a fatality rate of over 75%. These are not numbers of passengers or accidents. They represent individuals who made the same desperate choice to climb into the landing gear of an aircraft, hoping for a new life. Most of them never made it past the first few hours of flight. What makes these statistics even more striking is the profile of those who attempt it. Almost all were young men, most under the age of 30, and many came from regions facing war, poverty, or political crisis. Africa has seen repeated attempts, with flights from Johannesburg, Nairobi, and Luanda to Europe being especially common. Latin America has also reported several cases of young stowaways trying to reach the United States. The geography of airports like London Heathrow adds another layer to the story. Because planes often open their landing gear as they descend over residential areas, bodies have fallen directly into neighborhoods, gardens, and busy streets. In the last 25 years alone, at least 16 such incidents have been documented around West London, a grim reminder to local residents of the human cost of migration. And these tragedies are not confined to history books. In 2012, a man from Angola named Jose Matada fell from the sky over London while attempting to reach Europe. In 1970, a 17-year-old named Keith Sapsford plunged from a plane taking off from Sydney, Australia, after sneaking inside the wheel well. Both became symbols of how far people will go when there are no legal paths left open. More recent cases show that this pattern continues. In 2016, a teenager was believed to have fallen from a flight between Guatemala and Miami. In 2019, the body of a man was discovered in the wheel well of an Air France flight from Paris to Hanoi. In 2022, another victim dropped from a Kenya Airways flight as it approached London, landing in a private garden in Clapham. Each of these stories followed the same script: unimaginable risk, near-certain death, and headlines that fade quickly while the families are left behind to grieve. The statistics tell us that Justin's survival was not only unlikely, it was almost a miracle. Every other figure reminds us of the overwhelming odds stacked against stowaways who try the same path. But numbers alone cannot explain why people continue to attempt it. If the cost is so high and the chance of success so low, then what forces push young men into the wheel wells of planes again and again? While most stowaways never live to tell their story, a few cases stand out because survival seemed almost impossible. One of the most extraordinary happened in 2014, when a 15-year-old boy climbed into the wheel well of a plane in San Jose, California. The aircraft was bound for Hawaii, a flight of more than 5 hours at 38,000 feet. Temperatures dropped to minus 50 degrees Celsius, and oxygen was almost absent, yet the boy survived the journey. Doctors later said his body had entered a state close to hibernation, slowing his heart and metabolism just enough to keep him alive. His case shocked aviation experts and made headlines across the world because he had lived through conditions that kill adults in minutes. Another remarkable survival took place decades earlier in 1969. Armando Socarras Ramirez, a 17-year-old from Cuba, hid in the landing gear of a plane bound for Madrid. During the flight, he lost consciousness as hypoxia and cold overwhelmed him. When rescuers found him on arrival, his body temperature had dropped far below normal, and he was suffering from frostbite. Despite these severe injuries, he survived and later shared his story, becoming one of the earliest documented stowaways to endure such a long flight. Medical reports from similar survivors reveal a strange pattern. Some people had core body temperatures falling to 26 degrees Celsius, a level that usually causes cardiac arrest. Yet in these rare cases, the cold preserved vital organs long enough for them to recover once they reached medical care. It was not strength or planning that saved them, but a chain of biological accidents that worked in their favor. Each of these survivors carried scars, both physical and emotional. They lived, but they bore the cost of nerve damage, broken bones, or permanent hearing loss caused by the engines. Their stories remind us that survival does not mean escape from suffering, only a chance to live with it. When placed alongside Justin's journey from Johannesburg to London, these cases form a very small group of people who overcame odds stacked entirely against them. But they also highlight a deeper issue. If survival is nearly impossible, why do so many continue to risk their lives by hiding in wheel wells? Wheel well stowaways are not driven by adventure, but by desperation, and their choices are shaped by powerful forces far beyond the airport fence. Poverty remains the strongest push factor. In many regions of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, youth unemployment rates are staggeringly high. Young men finish school with no jobs to apply for, families struggle to survive on unstable incomes, and dreams of stability fade quickly. When legal pathways to migration are closed, the search for opportunity takes darker forms. Conflict also plays a central role. Entire generations grow up in places where war has destroyed homes, schools, and communities. When violence becomes part of everyday life, the idea of leaving, even through extreme risk, can seem like the only rational decision. In 2015, Europe faced the peak of its migration crisis. More than 1 million people crossed into the continent in that year alone, many fleeing Syria, Eritrea, and other nations torn apart by conflict. But as more arrived, the walls around Europe grew higher. Governments tightened asylum laws, increased border patrols, and made visas harder to obtain. Those who could not meet the requirements were pushed into dangerous alternatives, whether across the sea on fragile boats or in the shadows of airports. The decision to climb into a wheel well must be seen against this backdrop. For someone trapped by poverty or war, even a 1% chance of reaching safety is greater than the certainty of staying behind. The act is not only a gamble with death, but also a final message that life at home has become unbearable. Statistics underline the desperation. The FAA records show that 3 out of every 4 stowaways do not survive the attempt. Yet the pattern continues, repeating in London, Miami, Madrid, and other cities where long-haul flights arrive. Each time a body falls from the sky, it signals that somewhere else in the world, hope has run out for another young man. These are not isolated accidents, but symptoms of global inequality. They reveal the gap between regions with opportunity and those where survival is uncertain. Behind every attempt lies the same truth: the risks of staying have become greater than the risks of leaving. That is why the question cannot be limited to airport security. It must be asked on a deeper level. When people choose death over life at home, what does that say about the world we have built? The story ends not with closure, but with a set of hard questions about who we are as a global community. Many see the plane incident as a failure of airport security, and it is true that fences and guards must stop people getting onto runways. At the same time, the sight of a human body falling into a quiet neighborhood forces us to ask why anyone would take such a risk. When legal routes are closed and life at home offers only fear and hunger, some choose desperate paths because survival requires action, no matter how deadly. Humanitarian organizations point out that strict borders without safe alternatives produce exactly these outcomes. If people cannot apply for protection, work, or study through normal channels, they will try other ways to move. That does not excuse putting lives at risk, but it explains the choice. Policymakers face a real dilemma: tighten controls to prevent stowaways and risk turning airports into fortresses, or open more lawful pathways and hope fewer people gamble with their lives. There is also a security argument that cannot be ignored. Airports are critical infrastructure, and a system that allows unauthorized people near aircraft could be exploited by criminals or terrorists. If gates and fences are weak, then the danger is not only to migrants, but to everyone who flies. This is why experts call for both stronger perimeter protection and smarter, more humane migration policies. Investing in better surveillance and better cooperation between countries can reduce the chance of people sneaking onto aircraft. At the same time, expanding legal channels for migration, increasing humanitarian visas, and supporting development in sending countries tackle the root causes. The balance is delicate because too much focus on security alone will not stop the tragedies, and too much openness without safeguards could create other risks. Meanwhile, survivors like Justin live with the consequences every day. He was later granted asylum and settled in Liverpool, but the physical scars are permanent and the memories never fade. He walks with a limp, still carries the burns from the cables, and wrestles with the guilt that his friend did not survive. For families left behind, the pain is different but no less fierce. Wives and children who never knew the plan must rebuild lives with an absence that cannot be fixed by policy papers. What this case shows is that headlines fade faster than grief. The real work is quieter and slower, offering pathways that reduce desperation, improving airport security so criminal intent cannot hide behind human misery, and remembering the people behind the numbers. If we do nothing, more will try and more will die. If we act only to harden borders, we risk creating new vulnerabilities and new tragedies. So the question is not simple, and the answer will not be quick. Which choice will reflect both our need for safety and our duty to preserve human life? At more than 10,000 meters, where human survival is almost impossible, some still cling to the outside of airplanes. For them, staying behind means certain death and poverty, while leaving offers only a fragile chance at life. The journey of Carlito, Vale, and Justin was a tragedy. One lost his life, and the other survived, but carries the pain forever. Their story exposes the harsh truth about the struggle of the poor to change their fate, and it raises a final question: what hidden risks in global aviation have we not yet seen?